Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gapesty here. This is the Heroic DPS guide for Siegecrafter Blackfuse. And this video should assist DPS players with all that you need to know to get through this fight on Heroic difficulty. To begin, let's briefly talk about the new mechanic on Heroic that everyone needs to be aware of, which is Overcharge Weapon. This mechanic is used once per assembly line wave. So after the 3 assembly weapons are up on the assembly line and one of them's killed and the other 2 appear on the other side of the room, one of the 2 weapons that appeared over there will become overcharged by the boss. This causes it to have unique new abilities, basically. So the overcharge mechanic is pretty simple, and it's chosen based on a priority and rule set, which you can see in the top left. So overcharge first has a priority based on the weapon type. So magnet is a higher priority than mines, which is higher than missile, and finally laser. And then the second part of the rule is that overcharge will always select the next weapon in the priority list that has the fewest overcharges. So therefore, if all weapons have the same total overcharges during the fight, then the one that's available with the highest priority will be selected. Otherwise, it's the one with the highest priority with the fewest overcharges. So, once a weapon becomes overcharged, it has new abilities as mentioned. So we'll start with the Shockwave Missile, which you see on the left there. Overcharged Shockwave Missile is just like a regular missile, except it's targetable and killable. And once it's killed, that particular missile will cease to spawn missile waves immediately. So, as a DPS, the best thing you can do is, if you're on the platform, you're not on the assembly line, immediately kill the Shockwave Missiles as they appear. You'll get sets of 3, just like you can do with normal missiles. And so the faster you kill them, the less waves they'll produce, and the easier it is for your raid to dodge them. Now the second assembly weapon that's overcharged in no particular order is laser. So when this occurs, 3 almost full rings of laser fire will spawn around the room. You can see them spawning there all around us. And these rings are always the same positions every time they spawn. So once your raid gets used to those positions, you can prepare. And here you can see a top-down diagram that shows the location of those 3 laser rings, in red obviously, as well as these actual gaps that exist in each of the rings. So these gaps are there just for you to basically run from one part of the room to any other open part of the room while the overcharge laser occurs. Worst case scenario, though, is if you can't get to one of those gaps, you need to get across the laser, you can just quickly run across, but just be aware that you will take fire damage and get stacks while you're doing that. The next overcharge weapon is magnet. So unlike the normal magnet that just sucks everything in once and stops, the overcharge magnet actually has a push and a pull pulse that occurs. So the saw blades will be sucked in first, and then they're pushed out, as you saw there. They're sucked in again, pushed out again, and so on. And this will last for the duration of the overcharge. So this is a pretty difficult time in terms of potential damage, depending on your strategy, because those saw blades obviously hurt quite a bit. So the best thing you can do, depending on where your raid is positioned, is to, if you're on the left here like our raid, to be zoomed out quite a bit and dodge between them, like I'm trying to do here, or be along the very edge of the room, because the saw blades don't go that far out. The final overcharge is for mines, of course. And the basic way that the mines work is that the overcharge versions are larger versions of the mines. So they're about double the size, and when you kill an overcharge mine, it will split into 2 of these smaller normal crawler mines, which you see there in the back. So basically, a set of overcharge mines is equivalent to 3 times as many normal mines that you get in that set, since you get 3 of the overcharge, and then each of those split into 2 more of the smaller ones. But the overcharge versions are all susceptible to the same stuns and snares and slows and all that, just like the other ones. So just like normal difficulty, properly handling the assembly line is the most important aspect of this fight, especially for DPS. So here in the top left, you can see the basic chart that shows the assembly line weapon order. And I won't obviously read through this whole thing, you can do it on your own time. But this basically shows you on the left the assembly line count, so that is which set of assembly weapons we're talking about, and then the 3 weapons that are going to spawn up there. So with this information, your raid or your DPS members in particular should be able to plan which weapon they want to kill in any particular assembly set, and with the rules already laid out about how Overcharge works, this will also allow you to determine which weapon becomes overcharged in a given set. And you can plan this all out before you even make your first pull on the fight. There's absolutely no reason you can't do so. So if you know ahead of time which sort of weapons you want to avoid dealing with, then you probably kill those primarily on the assembly line, so you don't have to deal with them out in the main room, and they don't become overcharged very much. So I won't go into the full strategies, but for example, our raid used an anti-mine strategy, which meant we killed mines up on the assembly line whenever possible, because our raid was not very well suited to killing them down here on the main floor. And that makes other things more difficult, of course, but that's what worked best for us. So again, with that assembly order information, your raid should be able to figure that out, and then DPS assigned to the assembly line can target the appropriate weapons on the waves that they're available. So since assembly management is so important, let's talk a bit about some tips and tricks for helping you with the assembly line management and dealing with that. So there in the top left, you can see a list of them, but I'll go through them briefly here. The first important note is that your class will determine to quite a bit of degrees how many assembly lines you can do and how successful you'll be at it. So most classes can only go up to assembly line every other time because of a debuff caused when you enter one of the pipes. But hunters in particular can go up every time because they can get up there regardless of the debuff. And the basic way they do this is when they step in a pipe with the debuff active and it shoots them out, sort of ejects them, they can disengage up onto the platform anyway. So hunters are extremely powerful for assembly line duty, and if you have one in your raid or you are one, you should ideally volunteer for that job because you'll be much better at it. Also be aware that if you are a hunter, your pet will despawn when you go up there or come down, so you need to resummon it every time, which can kind of be a pain in the ass, but just be aware of that. The second major tip is that the laser waves that exist up there basically have one open gap that travels pretty quickly from right to left when you're facing down the assembly line toward the end of it, toward the exit. So just be aware that the pattern always goes from right to left pretty fast, so you'll need to get used to that and get ready to pass through the next one on the left of the current one that's about to open up as soon as it becomes available. You can also use levitate and other float mechanics, so like levitate from a priest, to avoid the assembly line's pull on you. It will not pull you down if you're floating above it, so to speak. So that can help you a bit with your movement issues if you have some. But just obviously keep in mind if you take damage, though you shouldn't up there, but if you take damage, it will break. Once a weapon is destroyed up there, players that jump down can actually use movement impairing effects, or not impairing effects, but movement boost effects that increase their speed or just their ability to leap to actually get off the platform and avoid the exit pipes entirely. You don't have to use the pipes at all. And then finally, you should be really careful when you come down off the assembly line about avoiding ground effects that might be active, because the timing will differ each time you exit since it's so frequent. So the main things to watch out for are the missile waves, if your raid is using a strategy that has missile waves, which most of them will, laser fire that exists on the ground, and then of course saw blades that either might exist or are just being thrown that could target someone near you or past you. So worst case scenario is you can't avoid these when you jump down one of these times, so make sure you have your personal full health ready to avoid dying there. And also, to help your healers out, don't be afraid to announce when you're dropping down, especially if it's in a particular phase where there's a lot of potential raid damage going on down on the main platform. So the final thing to discuss is, just like assembly line, we should talk about platform tips and tricks. This applies to most players, but DPS especially, that can help avoid damage to help your healers and whatnot will be very useful. So the first main thing is to zoom your camera really far out so you can easily see the incoming threats. Main things being missile waves, magnetized saw blades, lasers, stuff like that. Next is to practice moving just on the outside edge of incoming missile waves. And once that wave is triggered, you can run past it or into it to avoid the remaining waves. And mechanically this works just like it does on normal difficulty, but it's of the utmost importance that you do it flawlessly on heroic, because hitting a missile wave almost invariably means your death if it hits at the same time as an overload from the shredder. So here you can see the basic process of the waves. They're waiting for the one in front of me to go off, standing right near the edge of it, and then I'll pass through. So here's another one, and then I should run past this one. I'm going to go outside this one, actually. But anyway, that's the basic idea. And be aware that if the current missile waves are coming from an overcharged missile, you can actually stand inside a wave graphic if the overcharged missile is going to die before the wave graphic that's going on at the time actually finishes and triggers. So basically, it will stop immediately in the process if that weapon was killed. But that's just the overcharged ones. Anyway, next tip is to mentally prepare for each upcoming set of activated assembled weapons and then position yourself appropriately. So the basic idea is that your raid, as I mentioned before, should know the order that you're killing the assembly weapons and therefore which weapons will be active on the main platform. So you'll have one that's overloaded, or overcharged rather, and one that's just normal. So as a DPS, the best thing is to prepare yourself and kind of know which is which two weapons are coming up and which one's the overloaded version. So if it's, for example, if it's lasers, you can get positioned to your safe spot before the overcharged laser waves come in. If it's missiles, you can get ready to attack them. If it's mines, you can get ready to attack those. And of course, if it's magnet, you can get ready to position from that, as well as use probably survival cooldowns. Now for ranged DPS, it's going to be really helpful to have a clear indication from boss mods or whatnot when you're being targeted by a saw blade cast from the boss. Because if you can see when he's casting on you, you can do a number of things to avoid it, but the main thing is just to run at the time. If you're standing still, the saw blade will land where you are and hit you, and that could be deadly. But if you're running in one specific direction, the saw blade will miss you, unless it's straight at the boss. On the other hand, if you are a melee DPS, you won't be targeted by saw blades, but you should watch when he's casting saw blade for the facing of the boss. He will basically look toward or face the basic player that he's targeting with the saw blade. So you can see him there kind of facing toward that target. So as a melee DPS, you can avoid these by just watching when he's casting and get to his side or behind him during that period. And then finally, to help with the mines, particularly overcharge mines, make sure you utilize all your stuns, your snares, any burst DPS cooldowns you might have available, because mines, no matter which strategy you're using, are going to be extremely important, because if they're allowed to survive too long or they start moving away from their kill position too much, they'll start chasing players pretty rapidly and it'll be really difficult to catch up, basically. So just be aware of that. So I believe that covers everything for the Heroic DPS guide for Siegecrafter Blackfuse. As DPS, it all really just comes down to getting used to the platform mechanics, avoiding all the avoidable damage, and getting used to dodging the ground effects. And if you're assigned to the assembly team, which a good chunk of the DPS will be, especially if you don't have hunters, then getting used to doing the appropriate DPS you need to kill the assembly weapon while avoiding the lasers that are up there. And then just transitioning from the assembly line back to the main platform and vice versa. So those are the main three things to get used to. The actual DPS on the boss himself is, for the most part, kind of irrelevant. This is a pretty long fight until Berserk, which occurs on wave 13 of the assembly line after that. So the chances that you'll reach that are pretty low, even if your damage directly on the boss is not all that high. So the real goal is survival and getting used to the main mechanics, specifically the assembly line and dodging the stuff out here. So anyway, that covers everything. As always, good luck. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe.